Imagine walking into a desert city and suddenly seeing a mountain of green rising above the walls, dripping with waterfalls and swaying palm trees in the hot Mesopotamian sun. For centuries, this is how travelers and storytellers described the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the legendary 7 wonders of the ancient world. According to the story, they were built by King Nebuchadnezzar II for his homesick queen, to remind her of the green hills and mountains of her distant homeland. Terraced platforms rose high above the city, planted with trees, vines, and flowers imported from faraway regions, turning the palace into a man-made mountain of life. Ancient writers claim that engineers found a way to raise water from the Euphrates River to the highest terraces, keeping the gardens lush in a brutally dry landscape. But there is a problem. For all their fame, we have never found clear, undeniable archaeological remains of the Hanging Gardens. In Babylon itself, the Babylonians were careful record keepers, leaving thousands of clay tablets listing temples, palaces, and projects. Yet none of them clearly describe a hanging garden wonder. This silence has puzzled historians. How could such a massive, expensive construction leave so little trace in the records of the people who supposedly built it? Most of what we know comes not from Babylonian texts, but from later Greek and Roman authors who never actually saw the gardens with their own eyes. Writers like Strabo and Diodorus Siculus relied on second-hand reports and travelers' tales, mixing engineering details with dramatic storytelling to impress readers back home. They describe stone vaults, thick waterproof layers, and screw-like machines or chains that lifted water upward technology. That sounds surprisingly advanced for its time. Some of these details match real Mesopotamian techniques, such as the use of bitumen for waterproofing and complex irrigation systems along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Other parts sound more like literary exaggeration, blending real engineering with imaginative flourishes, designed to make the East look exotic and almost magical. Archaeologists digging in Babylon have found impressive palace foundations, huge walls, and evidence of gardens and water channels, but nothing that conclusively matches the legendary wonder. This led some researchers to ask a bold question. What if the Hanging Gardens were not in Babylon at all, but in a completely different city? One influential theory suggests that later writers mixed up Babylon with Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire further to the north. Assyrian king Sennacherib bragged in his inscriptions about creating elaborate palace gardens with trees, canals, and something he called a wonder for all people. He also claimed to have invented advanced water-raising technology to feed his royal gardens, describing machines that sound similar to the devices mentioned by Greek authors. Reliefs from his palace at Nineveh show terraced landscapes, canals, and lush gardens, suggesting that Assyrian engineers really did build something extraordinary. If this theory is right, the Hanging Gardens might have been a real place but located in Nineveh. Later, confused and rebranded as Babylonian in Greek retelling. Part of the confusion comes from how ancient writers used the word Babylon. Sometimes it meant the specific city. Other times, it symbolized Mesopotamia as a whole. To a distant Greek reader, any great Eastern capital might be loosely called Babylon, giving storytellers room to blur locations and merge different cities into one image. There's also the question of the word hanging. It may not mean literally suspended in the air, but rather overhanging. Terraces built one above another like a stepped hill. In that sense, the gardens did not dangle from chains. Instead, they rose in layers, each level jutting out over the one below, supported by massive stone or brick substructures. Such terrace constructions were well within the abilities of Mesopotamian builders, who already built ziggurat-step temple towers reaching impressive heights. The real challenge was not height, but water. Keeping large trees alive on raised platforms required constant irrigation, even during the hottest months. Engineers may have used hidden ramps, spiral staircases, or mechanical devices powered by human or animal labor to raise water from canals to the highest terraces. Some scholars imagine a series of buckets attached to a continuous chain, turning endlessly to lift water upward, similar to later water lifting machines. Even if we never find the exact device, Mesopotamian history is full of clever hydraulic engineering. From canal systems to flood control structures, this makes the idea of a technological garden wonder less impossible and more like an extreme expression. of skills they already possessed. Another layer to the mystery is psychological. Ancient people loved to attach symbolic meaning to architecture, and a king's garden was never just about plants. In the Middle East, a walled garden symbolized paradise, order, and power over nature. A towering green mountain in a desert city sent a loud political message. It said, "I control water, I command life in the desert, and I can recreate a lost homeland above the city itself." For a queen torn between her native mountains and the flat plains of Mesopotamia, such a garden would be both a gift and a stage for royal identity. For visiting ambassadors and traders, it would be a spectacle they would describe in awe as they returned home, carrying the legend even farther. Over time, these descriptions likely grew taller literally. Each retelling added a little more height, more trees, more impossible engineering, turning a real garden into a near-mythic wonder. By the time Greek authors wrote about it, the Hanging Gardens were no longer just a royal project. They were a carefully polished story about Eastern wealth and excess. This reflects how ancient superpowers used architecture as propaganda. Monuments were built not only to impress citizens, but to impress foreign audiences through stories. The Hanging Gardens may also be a case study in how knowledge is lost. Libraries burned, tablets broke, and wars reshaped cities again and again across centuries. Babylon itself was conquered, rebuilt, and partly dismantled. Later rulers reused bricks. Floods altered the landscape. Earthquakes and erosion erased delicate structures. A terraced garden relying on water channels, plaster, and timber would decay much faster than a stone pyramid or solid ziggurat. Nature slowly erases even grand designs. By the time modern archaeologists arrived, whatever remained might have been too damaged or too deeply buried to be recognized clearly as the famous gardens. There is also bias in what we choose to excavate. Early archaeologists often prioritized palaces, temples, and monumental gates over fragile garden features. Canals, soil layers, and plant remains can be hard to interpret, especially in sites that have been disturbed for thousands of years by later building and farming. Today, new methods like microbotanical analysis, soil chemistry, and remote sensing give us better tools to search for ancient gardens. Researchers now look for pollen traces, root channels, and subtle changes in soil that can reveal where trees and artificial terraces once stood. This may eventually confirm or rule out the presence of large engineered gardens in Babylon or Nineveh, but so far, the evidence remains suggestive rather than decisive. Because of this, the Hanging Gardens occupy a strange place between history and legend. Not fully proven, yet too persistent and detailed to dismiss completely. If they never existed at all, we must explain why independent sources describe such similar designs of terraced, irrigated gardens in Mesopotamian capitals. If they did exist, we must accept that one of humanity's most famous wonders has almost completely vanished, leaving behind only echoes in text and stone reliefs. Either answer is dramatic. Either scenario says something powerful about how fragile our greatest works can be and how stories sometimes outlive the things they describe. The mystery also exposes how we imagine the ancient Middle East. We often picture deserts and ruins, but the gardens remind us that people, their engineered green, complex landscapes, they were not just surviving. They were experimenting, displaying power through beauty, and pushing the limits of what water, brick, and plant life could do together. In a way, the legend of the Hanging Gardens is itself a kind of mental architecture, built layer by layer from memory, politics, desire, and nostalgia. People wanted to believe that somewhere in the desert, a king had created a vertical paradise to comfort a queen and impress the world. That emotional truth may be one reason the story survived, even as the physical structure, if it ever stood, crumbled and disappeared. Modern cities now build their own sky gardens, rooftop forests, and vertical parks, echoing the same dream of raising nature above the streets. When you see plants climbing the walls of a skyscraper or trees growing on high terraces, you're watching a very old idea gain new steel and glass. We can think of today's vertical gardens as distant descendants of that Mesopotamian vision. Human beings trying to fuse architecture, technology, and greenery into a single spectacle. So did the Hanging Gardens of Babylon really exist exactly as the legends claim? Probably not in the perfect, polished form we see in paintings and textbooks, but something like them grand royal gardens on terraces, fed by sophisticated irrigation via likely did exist in the ancient cities of Mesopotamia. Whether in Babylon, Nineveh, or both, they left deep impressions on visitors' minds, strong enough to travel across languages, borders, and centuries. In the end, the Hanging Gardens may be both real and legendary. Real enough to inspire awe, legendary enough to never be pinned down to one excavation trench. Their story reminds us that not all wonders survive as stone and brick. Some live on as questions, challenging us to keep digging, imagining, and re-examining what we think we know. And perhaps that is why they still fascinate us today. They sit in the space between proof and possibility, where history and imagination intertwine like vines on a forgotten terrace.